It starts so small, you almost don't notice. The alarm goes off. You hit snooze maybe once, maybe twice. The gym shoes stay by the door. The book on your nightstand gathers dust. You tell yourself you'll start fresh on Monday, but Monday becomes next week, then next month. And somewhere in that quiet drift, you start to wonder if maybe this is just who you are now. Or maybe you've been on the other side. You decided to change one tiny thing. Just drink more water. Take one short walk. Write a single paragraph a day. It felt almost pointless at first, but weeks later, something shifted. You had more energy, more clarity, more control. You look back and realize it all started with something so small, it barely seemed to matter. That's the invisible line where our lives begin to turn. Not when we overhaul everything, but when we start to shift by 1%. If that sounds like you, then this is the episode for you.
Welcome to the Kyle Mackie podcast, your weekly dose of clarity, energy, and inspiration. Kyle unpacks lessons from the world's top minds so we can all grow together. Grab your coffee, lock in, and let's make it happen.
Welcome back, my friends. I'm Kyle Mackie, and today we're diving into one of the most quietly powerful ideas in modern psychology. The kind of idea that doesn't just change how you act, it changes who you become. Because here's the truth. Most people don't fail because they lack motivation. They fail because their environment keeps pulling them back into old patterns. Think about it. How many times have you caught yourself reaching for your phone without even realizing it? Opening an app before your brain even says yes. I've been there. I used to roll out of bed and go straight into that endless loop of YouTube shorts. The scroll, the dopamine hit, the slow drain of focus that leaves you foggy before the day even begins. And what broke it wasn't some massive act of willpower. It was a system. I installed a simple app blocker on my phone. Suddenly, that temptation was gone. Not hidden, not resisted, gone. And just like that, mornings felt lighter. My focus came back. Because when the environment changes, your behavior follows. That's the power of James Clear's writes about in Atomic Habits. Tiny changes that over time create seismic shifts in who we are. He calls them atomic for a reason. Small, foundational, but explosively powerful when they combine. In this episode, we're going to unpack how that process works. Not as theory, but as lived experience. You'll learn how to redesign the system that quietly runs your life. How to make good habits inevitable and bad ones impossible. And how to shift your identity so deeply that success becomes your default setting. By the end, you'll see that transformation doesn't come from changing everything at once. It comes from changing one small thing every day in the same direction. And that's where the real shift begins. So, let's head back in time. The year was 2003. Inside a training facility in Manchester, a man named Dave Brailsforth was staring at a century of mediocrity. British cycling had been a running joke in the sport. In nearly 100 years, they'd won a single Olympic gold medal. No British rider had ever won the Tour de France. They were so bad that some of the top bicycle manufacturers refused to sell them bikes, afraid that being seen on British gear would hurt their brands. Brailsford was brought in to change that. But he didn't come from that fiery speeches or grand vision. He came with a philosophy that sounded almost ridiculous in its simplicity. The aggregation of marginal gains. He believed if you broke down every element of cycling, training, sleep, recovery, nutrition, mindset, equipment, and improved each by just 1%, the result would multiply. Small, consistent, almost invisible improvements that, when added together, could create extraordinary outcomes. He started with the obvious, redesigning the bike seats for comfort, rubbing alcohol on the tires for better grip, experimenting with lighter racing suits. But then he went further. He hired a surgeon to teach the riders how to wash their hands correctly to avoid colds. He tested different massage gels to speed recovery. He found the perfect pillows and mattresses for every cyclist to ensure they slept optimally. He even painted the inside of the team truck white so they could spot any speck of dust that might interfere with bike performance. None of these made headlines, but 5 years later, the results did. At the 2008 Olympics in Beijing, Great Britain won 60% of all gold medals in cycling. 4 years later, in London, they set 7 world records and 9 Olympic records. They came the moment nobody thought possible. Bradley Wiggins became the first British cyclist to win the Tour de France. His teammate, Chris Froome, would go on to win it 4 more times. In a decade, British cycling had gone from invisible to unstoppable, all from one philosophy: get 1% better in everything you do. That's the heartbeat of Atomic Habits. The belief that small habits, when compounded, become the most powerful force in your life. Because progress isn't a straight line, it's a curve, a compounding effect. Like money earning interest, like knowledge building on itself. You don't see the results right away, and that's what breaks most people. They think change isn't working because it doesn't look big enough yet. But here's what James Clear discovered and what Brailsford proved. The work you do in the dark is never wasted. It's stored. Every small habit is like a degree of heat added to an ice cube at 29 degrees. Nothing seems to happen until suddenly at 32, everything melts. This is why small habits matter. They're not small because they're weak. They're small because they're foundational. Your outcomes, your health, your relationships, your income, your peace are lagging indicators of the system you run every day. You don't rise to the levels of your goals. You fail to the levels of your systems. And that's where the real shift begins. You know, for the most of my life, I used to think success was all about goals. Set the big target, visualize it, go all in. That's where they taught us, right? But what I've learned again and again is that goals don't move you forward. Systems do. When I decided to train for a 100-kilometer ultramarathon, the finish line wasn't what made it possible. What made it possible was the system I built around it. Every morning, same time, I'd lace up and run. Didn't matter how I felt. Didn't matter what the weather was doing. That consistency was the system. And after every session, I'd follow the same recovery process: ice bath, compression boots, mobility work. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept me injury-free. It was a system that carried me through the hard days, not the vision of crossing the finish line. Because the truth is, motivation comes and goes. Systems don't care about motivation. They run whether you feel inspired or not. James Clear says it best. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the levels of your system. And once you really get that, everything changes. When I started this podcast, the goal wasn't just launch a show. The real win was creating a learning system, reading 30 minutes every morning, building a library of ideas I could turn into episodes. That habit made the creative process natural. I didn't have to scramble for inspiration because I'd already built it into my day. It's the same thing with stand-up. I stopped obsessing over writing great jokes and started focusing on writing system itself. 20 minutes of free writing every day. No filter, no pressure. Most of it was garbage. But every now and then, something real came out. The process created progress. And that's the magic of systems. They take success out of the future and bring it into the present. Because when you fall in love with the process, you don't have to wait to feel successful. You feel it every time you show up. So here's a thought for you. Stop asking, what's my goal? And start asking, what system would make this inevitable? What daily rhythm, what structure, what environment could make progress automatic so it doesn't depend on your willpower or your mood? And if you never reach the finish line, would you still love how you're running the race? Because that's the real test. The people who change their lives aren't the ones who chase goals. They're the ones who quietly build systems that change who they are. And that's where the real shift begins. Here's something I wish someone had told me years ago. You don't change your life by setting bigger goals. You change it by changing who you believe you are. See, most people try to build new habits by focusing on the outcome. I want to lose 10 kilos. I want to write a book. I want to make more money. But all those start from the outside. They're results focused. They say, once I achieve that, I'll be the kind of person I want to be. The problem is it doesn't stick. Because if your identity doesn't match the behavior, your brain will always pull you back to who you think you are. James Clear says it beautifully. Behavior that's incongruent with the self will never last. So instead of saying, I want to run an ultra marathon, I started saying, I'm the type of person who trains every day. Instead of saying, I want to start a podcast, I said, I'm the kind of person who will learn something new every morning. Instead of saying, I want to get better at stand-up, I said, I'm the kind of person who writes every day, even when the words are garbage. Every time you act, you cast a vote for the type of person you want to become. One run is a vote for being an athlete. One morning of reading is a vote for being a student of life. One focused sales call is a vote for being a professional who shows up prepared. You don't need unanimous votes. You just need enough to tip the balance. That's how identity shifts, not through massive change, but through repeated evidence. Every small win is proof. Every habit is an affirmation. And once your identity starts to shift, your habits become effortless. Because now they're just an expression of who you are. When I finally understood this, I stopped trying to improve my habits and started to reinforce who I wanted to become. If I wanted to feel like an athlete, I ran. If I wanted to feel like a leader, I taught. If I wanted to feel like a creator, I wrote. It wasn't about outcomes anymore. It was about alignment. So here's your action tool for this week. Write down this sentence. I'm the type of person who, and finish it in one way that matters to you. Maybe it's, I'm the type of person who keeps promises to myself. Maybe it's, I'm the type of person who leaves things better than I found them. Start small. One identity, one vote at a time. Because the more evidence you give your brain that you are that person, the less effort it takes to act like them. And here's a question to reflect on. If every action you took this week was a vote for your future self, what kind of person would you be electing? Because that's the truth about habits. They don't just build results, they build identity. They're not about becoming successful. They're about becoming someone new. And that's where the real shift begins. Now, we like to think we're in control of our choices, that we act out of willpower, discipline, motivation. But the truth is, our environment quietly shapes most of what we do. Every day, your surroundings send invisible signs that trigger your habits before you even think. The smell of coffee, the sight of your phone, the sound of a notification. Each one whispers a cue to your brain. Do that thing you always do next. And this is where most people go wrong. They try to fight bad habits with willpower, but they never change the cues that cause them. When I was stuck in that endless YouTube loop, short scrolls, repeat, I kept telling myself I'd stop, that I'd just be stronger. But I wasn't failing because I lacked discipline. I was failing because the trigger was still right there. So I stopped trying to fight it. I changed the system. I added an app blocker to my phone so that every time I picked it up in the morning, that old temptation wasn't even an option. That single shift changed everything. Not because I became stronger, but because I became smarter about my environment. James Clear calls environment the invisible hand that shapes human behavior. Disciplined people aren't superhuman. They're just better architects of their surrounding. If your kitchen counter is full of cookies, you'll eat cookies. If your running shoes are by the door, you'll run more. If your phone is on silent in another room, you'll get real work done. So don't rise to the occasion. We fall to the level of our environment. And here's the beautiful part. You can design the environment to work for you, not against you. Want to read more? Put your book on your pillow so it's the last thing you see before bed. Want to eat better? Prep healthy food so the friction disappears. Want to stop checking your phone? Make it harder to reach. That's how real change happens. Not through force, but through design. You can't control your feelings all the time, but you can control what triggers them. You can't summon motivation on demand, but you can build an environment that makes the right actions the easy one. So here's the action to go with this. Pick one habit you want to build or break. Then ask yourself 2 questions. How can I make it easier to start the good habit? How can I make it harder to start the bad one? That's all environmental design really is. Friction and flow. Add friction to what you want less of. Add flow to what you want more of. And to reflect on this, ask yourself, if your habits are a reflection of your environment, what story is your environment telling about you right now? Because you don't need to be stronger than your distractions. You just need to be strategic about what's within reach. When you design the world around you, you design the person you become. And that's where the real shift begins. So, here's the truth about human behavior. We're all wired for ease. If there are 2 paths to the same outcome, the brain will always choose the one with less friction. It's not laziness. It's not evolution. Your brain was designed to save energy, to conserve effort, to make life simpler. And that's why so many people struggle with change. Not because they don't care, but because the environment makes the right thing harder than the wrong thing. James Clear calls this the law of least effort. He says we naturally gravitate towards the option that requires the least amount of work. When you really understand that, it's like seeing the code behind your habits. Let me give you an example from my own life. When I started reading more each morning, it wasn't discipline that made it happen. It was friction design. I placed my book on the kitchen bench every night before bed, right next to the coffee mug. So when I woke up, there was no decision to make. Coffee, book, read. It was automatic. But when I didn't do that, the phone would sneak in. The news, the scroll, the noise. That's the law of least effort at work. Whatever is easiest wins. James tells a great story about this idea. There is a Japanese television repairman named, I'm going to mess this up, but Masanobu Fukuoka, who once said, the best way to change human behavior is not to persuade people, but to make the desired behavior easier. That same insight shows up everywhere, in product design, psychology, even cycling. When Dave Brailsford led British cycling to dominance, he didn't just train harder, he made success simpler to repeat. He built systems so tight, habits so streamlined, that doing the right thing became the path of least resistance. Every rider had their environment optimized, from sleep routines to gear placement, so they could focus on performing, not deciding. That's what most people miss. You don't need to push harder. You need to remove the friction that holds you back. James shares another example. A man who wanted to stop watching so much TV. Instead of trying to resist it, he simply unplugged the TV after each use and put the remote in a drawer across the room. The result? He stopped watching as much. Not because he was stronger, but because he made the wrong habit harder to start. That's the law of least effort in motion. So here's a simple rule I live by now. If you want to build a good habit, make it easy to start. If you want to break a bad one, make it hard to begin. When I was training for my ultramarathon, I made my morning frictionless. Shoes by the door, clothes laid out, alarms on the other side of the room. When everything's ready, there's no space for negotiation. But it works the other way too. When I was breaking the YouTube Shorts habit, I made it impossible to open the app in the first place. No access, no temptation. That's how the brain works. It follows the path of least resistance every single time. So, here's an action tool for this as well. Pick one habit you want to start and one you want to stop. Now ask yourself, how can I make this first one easier? How can I make the second one harder? Maybe it's putting your gym bag in your car so you don't skip the workout. Maybe it's deleting the delivery app that keeps draining your wallet. Maybe it's as simple as placing your notebook on your pillow so you remember to journal before bed. That's it. Not motivation, not intensity, not discipline, just design. And another question for you to reflect on. What would your life look like if every good decision was the easy one? Because you don't need to fight yourself to grow. You just need to make progress the path of least resistance. And that's where the real shift begins. Now, there's a quiet truth about human behavior that we don't like to admit. We don't repeat what's good for us. We repeat what feels good to us. That's the cardinal rule of behavioral change. What is immediately rewarded is repeated. What is immediately punished is avoided. Our brains were never designed for long-term thinking. They were built for survival, for quick feedback, instant payoff, that burst of dopamine that says, yes, this matters. That's why it's so easy to get stuck in loops that don't serve us. The junk food, the endless scroll, the skipped workouts, all of them give us instant satisfaction. The problem isn't that we're weak, it's that our brains are ancient. But here's the beauty. You can use that same system to your advantage. James Clear tells the story of a man named Brian Clark, an entrepreneur who'd been a chronic nail biter since childhood. No matter what he tried, willpower, reminders, shame, he couldn't stop. Until one day, his wife convinced him to get a manicure. He sat there in the chair, a little uncomfortable, a little out of place. But when it was done, something shifted. He looked down at his hands, neat, polished, strong. And for the first time in his life, he liked how they looked. That single moment of satisfaction rewired the loop. He didn't want to ruin it. That's how our brain works. Pleasure reinforces action. When something feels rewarding, even in a small way, your mind files it away as worth doing again. That's why one of the most powerful things you can do is make progress visible. When I was training for that ultramarathon, I didn't track miles. I tracked consistency. Every day I trained, I marked it a simple X on the wall calendar. Nothing fancy, but after a few weeks, that chain of X's became something I didn't want to break. That small visual hit of satisfaction kept me moving, even when motivation dipped. James talks about this too, how habits become stronger when you can see evidence of your success. He shares stories of people who usually tallied their results, used habit trackers, or visual cues just to feel the small rush of progress. One woman lost over 100 pounds by using paper clips. Every time she completed a healthy meal, she moved one clip from one jar to another. It sounds ridiculous, but it worked because it made the invisible visible. That's the secret. The human brain needs closure. It needs to see its own momentum. The same rule applies to sales, fitness, relationships, anything. We're not chasing the thing, we're chasing the feeling. And when you can make that right thing feel good, you'll do it without resistance. So instead of punishing yourself for bad habits, start rewarding yourself for the small wins. Finish your workout, celebrate it. Even if it's just a deep breath and that's like me. Read your 10-page, mark it down and watch your streak grow. Write one paragraph, acknowledge it, feel it. That's not self-indulgence, that's reinforcement. Because repetition doesn't create mastery. Enjoyment does. If you love the feeling of progress, you'll never have to force discipline. So, an action you can take here. Pick one habit you want to build and find a way to make it instantly satisfying. Maybe it's checking off as a visual tracker. Maybe it's a small physical cue, a smile, a breath, a quick note of gratitude. And then, to reflect on this, here's a question. If you looked at your habits right now, which one feels rewarding and which ones feel like punishment? Because your future will be built on whatever your brain thinks feels good. So make progress feel good. Make growth feel satisfying. That's how the right habits stop feeling like discipline and start feeling like you. And that's where the real shift begins. But let's be honest. The biggest threat to success isn't failure. It's boredom. Because everyone loves the beginning. The start is exciting. It's fresh. There's novelty. There's momentum. There's dopamine. But the middle, that's where most people quit. The Goldilocks rule says that human experience peak motivation when working on the tasks that are just on the edge of their current abilities. Not too hard, not too easy, but right in that sweet spot of challenge and growth. But even when you find that balance, there's still one thing you can't avoid: repetition. The grind, the routine, the part where nothing seems to move. And it's just you, the process, and the question: is this still worth it? That's where mastery is born. James Clear tells the story of top athletes who learned to embrace that boredom. He writes about elite rowers who trained for years in brutal repetition, the same strokes, the same drills, the same freezing mornings. When asked how they stayed motivated, one of them said, "We fell in love with the boredom of doing the work." That line hit me hard because it's truth in everything. Whether it's running, building a business, writing, or speaking, you reach a point where it's not exciting anymore. And in that moment, you find out whether you love the process or the idea of progress. When I was training for that 100K ultra marathon, there were mornings I didn't want to move. The alarm went off, and every cell in my body said no. But the system didn't care how I felt. It said run. And every time I pushed through that boredom, I found something new on the other side. Not excitement, but pride. A quiet kind of strength that only shows up when no one's watching. That's the difference between professionals and amateurs. Amateurs work when they feel inspired. Professionals work when it's time to work. James shares another story that captures this perfectly. The San Antonio Spurs basketball team under coach Greg Popovich, one of the most successful dynasties in NBA history. Their players practiced the same drills over and over again, years after mastering them. Popovich once said, repetition isn't punishment, it's preparation. They didn't chase motivation, they chased mastery. And here's what's fascinating. Once you fall in love with that rhythm, boredom turns into flow. Repetition becomes meditation. You stop looking for fireworks and you start finding meaning in the small, consistent acts of just showing up. So when it gets boring, that's your signal that the work is working. That's your past the fantasy and into the transformation. So let's take an action here. Find one habit that's starting to feel repetitive. And instead of fighting the boredom, reframe it. Say, this isn't boring. This is me mastering consistency. Shift from excitement to devotion. And to reflect on this a little bit more, here's a question for you. What would happen if you stopped chasing motivation and started chasing rhythm instead? Because the people who win long term aren't the ones who get fired up. They're the ones who keep showing up when the fire burns low. Fall in love with the boring work. That's where the future self is built. And that's where the real shift begins. Now, there is a moment in every journey when nothing seems to be happening. You're doing the right things, showing up every day, following the process, but the results just aren't happening. That's the most dangerous moment because it's that one whisper, what's the point? James Clear calls this the plateau of latent potential, the long, flat stretch where growth feels invisible, even though everything you're doing is working beneath the surface. He uses the image of the ice cube sitting in a cold room. At 25 degrees Fahrenheit, nothing happens. At 26, still nothing. At 29, nothing. At 31, nothing. Then, at 32 degrees, the tiniest shift. The ice begins to melt. All the invisible effort, all those degrees of change that looked like failure, were actually progress waiting for its threshold. That's what makes habits so powerful and so hard to trust because progress is never linear. It's stored. You're not failing when you don't see change. You're compounding. I've felt that truth in my own life so many times. Training for that ultra marathon, weeks of running when my legs hurt, my lungs burned, and the numbers on the watch barely moved. There were days I questioned everything. But somewhere deep down, I knew the work wasn't wasted. It was being stored. Every step was a degree. And when the breakthrough came, when I finally crossed that finish line, it looked like it happened all at once. But it didn't. It built slowly, invisibly, one quiet repetition at a time. That's how transformation works. Not in leaps, but layers. James tells the same story through his own recovery after an accident that nearly killed him. After a baseball bat shattered his skull and left him in a coma, his life didn't change overnight. He had to rebuild from nothing, one slow habit at a time. Tidying his dorm room, getting good sleep, showing up to class. Tiny wins that seemed meaningless until they compounded into something extraordinary. Years later, he was a team captain, academic All-American, one of the top athletes in his college. What changed him wasn't motivation. It was patience with invisible progress. The world celebrates the explosion, but the real growth happens in silence, in the parts nobody sees. When you're planting seeds, not harvesting fruits. So if you're in that space right now where it feels like the work isn't working, stay there. You're not behind, you're just heating the ice. Because every habit, every repetition, every quiet choice is a degree of progress. And when that threshold hits, when everything you've stored finally breaks through, it won't be magic, it'll be math. So, let's take an action. Pick one area where you've been doubting your progress. Maybe it's your business, your body, your focus, your consistency. Then reframe it. Instead of saying, it's not working, say, the work is just being stored. That one sentence changes everything. And now one last reflection question. If your results are lagging, measures of your habits, what invisible progress might be happening right now that you just can't see? Because your success is never sudden. It's built in silence, then revealed all at once. Trust the invisible work. It's the most honest kind of progress there is. So, somewhere along the way, you realize it was really never about habits. It was about the person they were shaping. Every small change, the morning read, the blocked app, the extra kilometer, the quiet discipline, it all adds up to something bigger than a checklist. It adds up to a new identity. The work you've done in silence, the repetitions no one saw, the mornings you didn't feel like showing up, those were about self-improvement. They were about self-creation. Because the truth is, who you are today is not a fixed thing. It's a system of stories you've told yourself and evidence you've built through your actions. Every habit is a vote for who you believe you can be. When you started this journey, maybe you thought you were just trying to get better, healthier, more focused, more disciplined. But what you've really been doing is building proof. Proof that you can trust yourself. Proof that you can keep promises to yourself. Proof that change isn't something that happens to you. It's something that happens through you. James Clear says, you don't build habits to get something. You build habits to become someone. And when you really understand that, the whole game changes. Because now you don't need to chase results. You created systems that carry you towards the kind of person you decided to be. The 1% changes don't just compound into better performance. They compound into identity. One day you wake up and you realize you're not trying to be consistent anymore. You just are. You're not trying to be healthy. You're someone who moves daily. You're not trying to be focused. You've built a world that keeps you aligned. That's the moment where doing becomes being. Where the work becomes who you are. And that's the real victory. Not the medals, not the metrics, but the quiet knowing that you've become the kind of person who does what they said they'd do. Now, who are you becoming? One small habit at a time. 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 One small habit Because if every action is a vote, then you're the architect of your own becoming. And every day you're casting ballots for the kind of life you'll live next year. The work is never wasted. The progress is never lost. And the person you're building is already unfolding degree by degree. Keep going. Keep stacking the proof. Keep becoming. Because that's where the real shift begins. Now, when you really look back at it all, it comes down to something so small, most people overlook it. Change doesn't happen when you overhaul your life overnight. It happens when you start moving 1 degree at a time, quietly, consistently, patiently, because small habits compound, just like interest. You don't notice it at first, but every repetition is adding up, stacking invisible progress beneath the surface until one day it all looks effortless. Systems beat goals every time. Goals give you direction, but systems create motion. You don't need to chase the finish line when the process is already moving you towards it. And identity comes first. You don't change your life by saying, I want to have more. You change it by saying, this is who I am now. Every action is a vote for that person. One quiet piece of proof that says, this is me. Design beats discipline. You don't need more willpower. You need better architecture. When you shape your environment so good, habits are easy and bad ones are hard. Change stops feeling like a fight. Eases fuel consistency. The easier it is to start, the harder it is to stop. Because the truth is, we don't need to push harder. We just need to make progress, the path of least resistance. Rewards drives repetition. When progress feels good, you'll never have to force it. Make your habits satisfying. Make your wins visible. Give your brain a reason to say, let's do that again. And yes, boredom will show up. It always does. But that's not a sign you're stuck. It's proof that you're evolving. Boredom is quietly rhythm of mastery. Fall in love with the repetition everyone else runs from. Because the work you can't see is the work that changes you. The progress that feels invisible is the foundation that holds everything together. You might not notice the shift day by day, but one day you'll look back and realize you've already become the kind of person you were trying to be. It was never about doing more. It was about becoming more. One vote, one system, one small shift at a time. You are the architect of your habits. And your habits are the architecture of your life. Now, my friends, here's your challenge for the week. It's simple. It's short. But if you actually do it, it'll change how you see yourself. For the next 7 days, I want you to track one small habit, just one. Not 10 new goals, not a whole morning routine, just one tiny action that represents the kind of person you want to become. Maybe it's reading 10 pages a day. Maybe it's walking for 10 minutes after dinner. Maybe it's writing a single line before bed. Whatever it is, keep it small enough that you can't fail. Then, and this is the part that matters, make the progress visible. Create proof. You can use a notebook, a habit app, a sticky note, anything you like. But each time you complete that small habit, mark it down. See it, feel it. That little mark, that check, that X, that's your vote. Every time you do it, you're casting a ballot for the person you're becoming. Because this week isn't about achieving something big, it's about building evidence. By the end of 7 days, you'll have physical proof that change is happening. Not because of a massive breakthrough, but because you're learning to trust yourself again. So that's the challenge. Pick your 1% habit. make it visible, keep the chain going, and every time you do, whisper this to yourself. This is me now. Because it is. You're not trying to become the kind of person who follows through. You already are. Maybe the smallest change you make this week won't look like much. Maybe it's just a glass of water instead of a soda, a page instead of a scroll, a pause instead of a reaction. But that's how change always begins. Not with fireworks, but with a whisper. The quiet proof that you're capable of something different. Because habits are really just stories we tell our future selves. And every small action you take is a sentence in that story. A line that says, I'm becoming someone new. Most people never make it far enough to see who they could have been. They quit during that silent season when the ice hasn't melted yet, when the proof hasn't appeared. But you're still showing up. And maybe that's the real miracle, that even when you can't see the progress, you still believe in it. So tonight, when you close your eyes, ask yourself this: what would happen if I gave these tiny changes one more week, one more month, one more year? What would my life look like if I just kept casting votes for the kind of person I'm becoming? Because that's how change happens. Not overnight, but over time, quietly, invisibly, beautifully. One day, you'll wake up and realize you've already become the person you're trying to be. So, I want to thank you for tuning in to the Kyle Mackie podcast. If you want to keep learning, keep growing, and keep building the life that feels true to you, be sure to subscribe and come back next episode. I'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to the Kyle Mackie podcast. If you got value from today's episode, take a second to like, share, and subscribe. Every listen helps this message reach more people, just like you.